Good afternoon. On Wednesday, December 22nd, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan invited a delegation of Jewish leaders, including the Alliance of Rabbis of Islamic States, to his palace in Ankara, where he made lovely conciliatory statements towards Israel, such as, quote, "Turkey's relationship with Israel is vital towards the stability of our region," and, quote, "We must all work together to strengthen peace and stability in the Middle East. We are ready to improve our cooperation and make better use of our potential." This is coming out of the mouth of a leader who as recently as last May accused Israelis of, quote, terrorism. And he said it is in their nature, adding they're murderers to the point that they kill children who are 5 or 6 years old. They are only satisfied by sucking their blood. Additionally, he lashed out at U.S. President Joe Biden for America's support of Israel, saying that he has, quote, bloody hands. State Department spokesman Ned Price strongly condemned these statements, calling them, quote, reprehensible and anti-Semitic. What is behind this sudden apparent change of heart? Does it have anything to do with Turkey's inflation rate of 36%, with approximately 14 Turkish liras, equivalent to $1 US? Does it have anything to do with Turkey's troubled relationships with Egypt, with Saudi Arabia, and with the UAE? Here to discuss this is our dear friend Aykan Erdemir. Dr. Aykan Erdemir is a senior director for the Foundation for Defense of Democracies Turkey program, and is a former member of the Turkish Parliament. He has served in the EU-Turkey Joint Parliamentary Committee, the EU Harmonization Committee, and the Ad Hoc Parliamentary Committee on the IT sector and the Internet. Aykan is a founding and steering committee member of the International Panel of Parliamentarians for Freedom of Religion or Belief, and a drafter of and signatory to the Oslo Charter for Freedom of Religion or Belief in 2014, as well as a signatory legislator to the London Declaration on Combating Antisemitism. He also serves on the Anti-Defamation League's Task Force on Middle East Minorities. He was awarded the Stefanus Prize for Religious Freedom in 2016 and the first Freedom Award of the Hellenic American Leadership Council in 2019 in recognition of his advocacy for minority rights and religious freedoms. Aykan is co-author of the 2016 book, Antagonistic Tolerance: Competitive Sharing of Religious Sites and Spaces. His work has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the New York Post, Foreign Affairs, Foreign Policy, The Diplomat, The Hill, Politico Europe, the Huffington Post, the National Interest, More on the Rocks, the Cipher Brief, Business Insider, Turkish Policy Quarterly, Harayat Daily News, Al Arabiya, Ahram, the Jerusalem Post, and the Times of Israel, and recently Newsweek, among others. He holds a BA in International Relations from Bilkent University, Ankara, and an MA in Middle Eastern Studies and a PhD in Anthropology and Middle Eastern Studies from Harvard University. So, Aykan, it is a rare and wonderful pleasure to have you back again. Can you please explain what's actually behind Erdogan's sudden change of heart towards Israel and the Jewish people?
Thank you, Sarah, for inviting me and address this distinguished audience, and Happy New Year to everyone. When I was thinking about how best to answer this challenging question, I thought about the following framework. Imagine that you have an eccentric colleague who year after year provide you with a stock market recommendation. And he tells you that this particular stock will be going off the roof this year. And year after year, the stock hits rock bottom. But the same eccentric colleague tells you, no, this year is going to be when this stock is going to be hit. And so the question is, how many years would you be willing to sink your money into a stock that never lifts from the ground. So this is literally Erdogan's Turkey in a nutshell. That is, over the years, we have seen repeated gestures of goodwill and benevolence toward either Turkey's Jewish community or other Jewish communities around the world coming from Erdogan, at times, punctuated by bursts of antisemitism and hate and prejudice. And at the same time, we have seen repeated appeals to the Turkish-Israeli rapprochement, which haven't materialized yet. So Erdogan is really like that eccentric colleague who keeps on promising good news, but those good news never get delivered. And ultimately, I think, what unites both of these stories, both of these narratives, is that we have to take a look at the fundamentals. So with the publicly traded stock that never lifts off, we have to look at the fundamentals of that company. And with Erdogan, we have to look at his fundamentals. And what I mean by that is his core values, his background, where he comes from, what is his worldview, what is his ethos. So anyone who approaches Turkish politics, who approaches Erdogan's Turkey through this lens of fundamentals, will not be misguided. Now, both Turkey and the United States, as well as the European Union, are full of analysts, experts, and policymakers who have been misled over the last 2 decades. You know, since the rise of his Islamist-rooted Justice and Development Party, namely the AKP, to power in 2002, Erdogan has claimed that he has taken off his Islamism shirt, and now that he was a reformed Democrat. He compared his own movement to the Christian democratic parties in Europe. And there were many takers on both sides of the Atlantic. I was always a skeptical because I like focusing on the fundamentals. I've been following Erdogan at least since his election as the mayor of Istanbul in 1994. And I know how he has been inculcated with hate and prejudice against Jews, against Christians, against non-Sunni Muslim minorities, against women, against LGBTI individuals. So this is a person, both within his family and within his Islamist movement, inculcated with all sorts of prejudice and hate. And I would argue those values, those prejudices, those biases still shape and guide who Erdogan is. And Sarah, you made my presentation easier because you have quoted directly from Erdogan. So this quote, which the House the Task Force for Combating Antisemitism slammed for being tantamount to blood libel against the Jewish people, came last year. And in fact, that statement came shortly after Erdogan's outreach to Israel. So now the question is, if we have an authoritarian leader who has these wild mood swings, you know, using one of the worst forms of anti-Semitism one day, attacks Israel regularly in every single one of his UN General Assembly speeches, but then reaches out to Israel the other day, and then the following week tries to reach out to the Jewish community. Would you be willing to be duped or conned, basically, by this person? And how many times one needs to be misled before deciding that, you know what, I don't think Erdogan is capable of change. Now, I know that these latest developments have once again rekindled sentiments, wishful thinking, especially in Washington, that Erdogan's Turkey could be that magic counterweight Washington needs in the Middle East against both Iran and Russia. And this comes especially at a time when the United States has been pivoting away from the Middle East towards Asia. Now, I can see how appealing, how attractive such a magic solution would be. And to be frank, if you take out Erdogan from the phrase Erdogan's Turkey, I could be on board with that statement, because I believe that it is in Turkey's best interest, it is in NATO's best interest for Turkey to be solidly aligned with NATO and the transatlantic values, and Turkey to be hence a counterweight to Iran and Russia in the region. And to be frank, anyone who knows history, not just the Cold War history of Turkey being a counterweight in NATO's southeast flank against Soviet Russia, but also the history of the last 500 years in the Middle East knows that the Ottomans and the Safavids were these two opposing empires, playing somewhat of a counterbalancing role against one another. So I can see where such wishful thinking comes from, meaning it makes sense historically and politically. It also makes sense from Turkey's national interest point of view. But what such analysis misses is that the Turkey we have today is not the Turkey that we have known throughout the Republic, as a member of NATO. Today's Turkey is basically Erdogan's Turkey, and Turkey's assets, resources, institutions are no longer dedicated to serving Turkey's national interests or Turkish people's interests, but on the contrary, they are all subservient to serving Erdogan's transnational Islamist interests, his Muslim Brotherhood aligned supremacist ideologies, interests. Hence, although I would love to see the day when Erdogan and Erdoganism are gone and Turkey returns to normalcy, and that normalcy would mean Turkey's return to the European Union accession, Turkey's return to the Council of Europe's values, Turkey's return to a good standing member within NATO and commitment to transatlantic values, Turkey's going back to the win-win partnership it has built with Israel, especially during the 1990s. But at the same time, I think it's best not to be naive. That is, we are not there. As long as Erdogan is in power, Turkey will not be there. Now I will try to lay out some of the dynamics which keep on forcing Erdogan to come up with such statements, but at the same time, why we should never trust these attempts, these outreach attempts. Now, first of all, let me tell you that Erdogan's outreach to Israel does not happen in a vacuum. It is part of a broader outreach to Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia. Now, anyone who follows the Middle East closely knows that this is, in fact, one of the key fault lines in the Middle East. On the one hand, we have Turkey and Qatar and Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood alliance. And on the other hand, we have, the traditional regimes in the Middle East, Egypt, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia, Bahrain and others who are against the Muslim Brotherhood and the political Islam, the ideology of political Islam it represents. So Erdogan's outreach to Egypt, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia is really interesting because it is really a reach across this fault line. Now, the question is, does this show that Erdogan has given up his political Islamist agenda? Has he given up or abandoned Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood? Now, I always believe that in politics, in foreign and security policy, deeds speak louder than words. Now, if we take investigative journalists, if we take Israeli officials' words to be accurate here, Hamas continues to use Istanbul as its second most important logistical base in the world after Gaza. So it seems Erdogan's outreach to Israel does not necessarily preclude his patronage of Hamas and facilitation of Hamas. That's one. And by the way, for the skeptics, the US Treasury has since 2018 sanctioned Turkey-based individuals and entities for jihadist finance associated with Hamas, Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, and others, IRGC, Quds Force, and other entities, at least 7 times. Which shows that this is not just some journalistic expose, or this is not just some statement by Israeli officials. This is, anyone who knows how the US Treasury sanctions work, how OFAC works, would know the meticulous research and documentation and evidence that go into terrorism finance designations and sanctions. So clearly, Turkey has a terrorism finance problem. Clearly, Hamas is one big part of that problem. We also know that the Muslim Brotherhood has Istanbul as its top headquarters in the world. Once Muslim Brotherhood was ousted from government in Egypt, the key cadres ended up in Turkey, in Istanbul, again, under the patronage of Erdogan. So yes, Turkey has been reaching out to Egypt, but it continues its support of the Muslim Brotherhood. In fact, the US Treasury sanctioned a violent offshoot of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, Hasm, for having its key financiers in Istanbul. Again, this was last year. And it's the same with Hamas. So one could argue that Erdogan's understanding of an outreach is mostly about, sweet talk, but it doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily accompanied by the work that it would require. Now, the same with the UAE and Saudi Arabia. Erdogan hosted Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, MBZ, last November. And he just announced that he will visit Saudi Arabia in February this year. We're not yet sure whether he will be able to meet with MBS in Saudi Arabia. Now, you might ask, why suddenly all these overtures? Why is Erdogan suddenly so interested in reaching out? Although he's not necessarily willing to change his Islamist policies. I would argue that this has a lot to do with Erdogan's bankruptcy on 2 fronts. The first one is the diplomatic front. That is, Erdogan, until recently, has cherished what he called precious isolation or precious loneliness. What this really meant was, since the Arab Spring, Erdogan's bet on the Muslim Brotherhood failed, and Erdogan and his companies, his assets, his proxies were pushed out from the greater Middle East and the Eastern Med. And early on, Erdogan celebrated this. He said, oh, this is only because we are the only righteous one. We are the only country that does the right thing, so we don't care. It seems by this point, Erdogan has realized that this is not sustainable, that the growing alliance in the Eastern Mediterranean, between Greece, Cyprus, Israel, Egypt, Jordan, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, to the exclusion of Turkey, I think made especially a Turkish policy elite realize the consequences of such an isolation, that it's nothing that precious after all. And the second bankruptcy is immediately linked to this, and that is an economic and financial bankruptcy. You know, once you are so isolated in the region from the region's, you know, powerhouses, then we have witnessed Turkish exporters losing markets. You know, Turkish industrialists and investors were pushed out of Egypt. Turkey lost its share in the Egyptian market. Same with Saudi Arabia, same with the UAE. Now on the Israeli front, that's an interesting outlier. Even during the worst of years, because of such strong people-to-people and institutional ties between Israel and Turkey, trade continued to increase, which, by the way, is, I think, an important, you know, hopeful kind of footnote that we have to add here. That is, given there is such a solid base of people-to-people and trade ties between Israel and Turkey, we could indeed be hopeful about a bouncing back of relations, but not until Erdogan is out. Meaning, I do sincerely believe that diplomatic relations, political relations, and one day, hopefully, security and intelligence cooperation will bounce back. But Erdogan will remain an obstacle, limiting the spillover, the positive spillovers from trade and people-to-people ties to the diplomatic, security, and intelligence relationships. So again, these, going back to my, you know, thesis about two bankruptcies, a diplomatic bankruptcy and an economic bankruptcy, forcing Erdogan to at least publicly change his hardline position toward these countries, toward these states, I think are a dynamic that we really need to take into consideration here. Now, you might wonder, how serious a push does economics exert here? You know, what makes Erdogan so desperate to reach out to his quote unquote arch enemies? You know, these are the states Erdogan has slammed repeatedly over the years. He accused them, you know, of, you know, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Israel, of, you know, plotting the coup, plotting against Turkey, supporting terrorism, and so on and so forth. You know, it's a long list. So what forces Erdogan to walk back from such accusations? And for that, I think the best way to start is taking a look at why Eurasia Group President Ian Brenner, who always lists top 10 global risks at the start of each year. You know, this year on Monday, he listed Turkey again as one of the top 10 global risks, you know, alongside, you know, COVID and Iran and Russia and so on and so forth. So what makes Eurasia Group see Turkey, a NATO member state, a Council of Europe member state, a European Union member accession, you know, state, what makes Eurasia Group see Turkey as such a big risk for the globe? Now, it has, besides some of the security and foreign policy dynamics, which I tried to allude to before, the finance part is really crucial here. Now, Erdogan admitted last year that he burned through $165 billion of foreign currency reserves of the Turkish Central Bank to support the lira, Turkey's currency. Now, you might wonder, why does he need to burn all of Turkey's foreign exchange reserves to support the lira? It's in a very interesting way tied to anti-Semitism. You know, over the years, Erdogan has repeatedly referred to the interest rate lobby as one of Turkey's key enemies. And this, everyone in Turkey knows, this is a euphemism to refer to the Jewish community. You know, for Erdogan, Turkey's economic problems stem not from his own mismanagement and corruption, but only because of a global Jewish conspiracy. So he argues there is a global interest rate lobby, a cabal, that undermines the Turkish economy, forcing it to pay high interest rates. Hence, Erdogan's economic policy, monetary policy over the years has been to try to keep the interest rates low, artificially low, so that he can have his bizarre crusade against the interest rate lobby. Now, this unorthodox economic policy, by the way, I have been writing about this since 2018, 2019. I've been warning that this would bankrupt Turkey, has finally depleted Turkey's foreign currency reserves. Erdogan first destroyed Turkish central bank's independence, then forced its monetary policy committee to continue to lower interest rates, even though the inflation was rising. And this, of course, led to dramatic devaluations of the Turkish lira. And Erdogan tried to prop up the lira by selling all of Turkey's reserves. So at this point, Turkey's net international reserves are down to $8 billion as of the last week of December. But the real economic portrait is even worse, because this $8 billion includes over $60 billion of window dressing, creative accounting, through swap deals, either with local banks or with Qatar and China and South Korea. So when we do the real math, Turkey's net international reserves, excluding the swap shenanigans, is negative $55 billion. Now, this is not a sustainable economic situation, especially in the run-up to the 2023 presidential and parliamentary elections. Hence, Erdogan needs a lot of international goodwill. He needs foreign currency, he needs trade, he needs investments. In fact, right after his November meeting with MBZ, with the United Arab Emirates, MBZ, Abu Dhabi announced a potential investment of $10 billion into Turkey. Now, we don't really know whether that will materialize, but Erdogan even benefits from the reporting on such currency inflows. Because let me remind you that, especially since 2019, Turkey's Western capital inflows have come to a halt. There has been an exodus of capital from Turkish equities and bonds. And we are at a historic low within the last 2 decades. We are at a historic low in terms of Western capital in Turkey, because no sane investor would like to take the risk of Erdogan's markets, especially because he meddles constantly in those markets. So Erdogan, who dug himself into this hole, now hopes that these, just these gestures of outreach to Israel, to the UAE, to Saudi Arabia, to Egypt, can take him out of this, hole. Now, my guess is it will not be enough, meaning there are two flaws in this proposition, meaning on the one hand, let's say some light improvement to bilateral and multilateral relations will not be enough to save the markets. And we know that Erdogan ultimately always comes short when it comes to such rapprochement attempts. Now, to convince you further, let me provide you one anecdote from the last round of the UN General Assembly to show you why Erdogan always takes 1 step forward and 2 steps back, because of where he comes from. Now, One of Erdogan's tricks, every single time he comes to the UN General Assembly, during which he is almost always under criticism for his anti-Semitism, anti-Christian, and anti-Western bias, is to try to whitewash his crimes by reaching out to American Jewish organizations and then publicizing it. And then saying, look, I'm not an anti-Semite. If I were an anti-Semite, I wouldn't have met with these organizations. Now, last year in 2021, none of the American Jewish organizations agreed to meet with Erdogan and become part of this stunt. So Erdogan ended up without a publicity event. Guess what he did? You know, there is the Turkish American National Steering Committee, TASC, which is a Turkish American organization with very close ties to the Erdogan government, including one of Erdogan's relatives on the steering committee. So this is as close as you can get to the Erdogan regime. Now, when Erdogan failed to have a meeting with American Jewish organizations, TASC on September 21st, you know, right around the UN General Assembly, announced that they signed a joint declaration with the Orthodox Jewish Chamber of Commerce, a small New Jersey and New York-based initiative. And this protocol, this joint declaration, was to join forces against the boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign, and to support the Abraham Accords. Now, many people were impressed that Ankara was behind such an initiative. I was not impressed. I was puzzled because I knew Turkey, alongside Iran and Hamas, were the most vocal critics of the Abraham Accords. And I also know that last year, right before this declaration, Turkey was one of the sponsors of a BDS event in Turkey, including a US designated terror financier, a Palestinian terror financier. So, can really a government shift course overnight in such a dramatic fashion? I predicted not really. And I was proven right, because within 24 hours, you know what happened? The Turkish American Steering Committee withdrew from the joint declaration and abandoned the Orthodox Jewish Chamber of Commerce. And their announcement was, due to lack of proper consensus, TASC is withdrawing from the joint TASC OJC declaration. To add insult to injury, the following day, TASC issued an apology, not to the Orthodox Jewish Chamber of Commerce, but to Turkey's deputy foreign minister, saying the minister who held this joint declaration in his hand in the photo, that the minister wasn't really aware what declaration he was holding in his hand when he posed for that photo. Now, it's all up to you whether you believe this or not, but I think this is yet the most concrete example of how Erdogan will not be embarrassed to walk back within 24 hours all his commitments, and how this is almost always just window dressing or a publicity stunt, and that at the end of the day, from my perspective, and let me end with this, and then we can have detailed Q&A session. I think this all goes back to who he was when he was a member of Turkey's Islamist, National Salvation Party back in the 70s. We know that in his youth, Erdogan was very active in the youth movement of the Islamists. And I always give this example. He adapted a theater play, staged it as a director, and played the lead role in a play called Mas Kom Yah. This was the acronym for Mason Communist Jew. And this play was revolving around the idea that all evils, and this is direct quote from the play, all evil regimes and inventions in the world are Jewish inventions, and that such Jewish conspiracies always target Turkey. So that the play has, a Turkish business person who has been targeted by, crypto Jews who pretend to be, communist kind of union members. It's like, that's who he was in his teens. I would argue that's who he is today. And every time what would come to you as a slip of the tongue of Erdogan is not a mistake. It is simply a reflection of who he really is. It's a reflection of his core values. But to end on a positive note, let me tell you that as Erdoganism, as an ideology and practice, is coming to an end, is bankrupting economically, politically, diplomatically, I think there is a great opportunity in the 2023 presidential and parliamentary elections to move beyond this 2 decades of lapse of reason, what I call a momentary lapse of reason, and for Turkey to return to what I call normalcy. It's conventional foreign policy, not geared toward Islamism, but geared toward becoming an integral, a bona fide member of the transatlantic alliance, and a strong adherent of its values of democracy, the rule of law, due process, human rights, and a Turkey that I hope will once again be a beacon for the Muslim majority world to show that democracy, free and fair elections, the rule of law, and free markets can exist alongside being a Muslim majority country, and that there can be a separation between mosque and state, and that Muslim majority states that treat their non-Muslim citizens, Christians, Jews, atheists, agnostics, as equal citizens, prosper, and attain peace, compared to those clerical regimes, such as the Islamic Republic of Iran, which not only bring death and destruction to its neighborhood, but also to its very own people. So let me end on this positive note that Turkey, hopefully in the post-Erdogan era, will once again be a beacon of democracy, prosperity, and peace for other Muslim majority countries.
Thank you. Aykan, this was amazing, so clear, and I thank you for ending on a positive note. As the former Soviet dissident Andrei Sakharov used to say, if you want to know a country's foreign policy, look at the way they treat their dissident population. Can you address the issue of human rights in Turkey under Erdogan? As you know, yesterday in the Washington Post, there was an editorial mentioning the capricious and arbitrary arrest and imprisonment of Osman Kavala. Can you explain what happened in 2016 to those who were arbitrarily arrested because of the coup?
Now, Sarah, I really would like to thank you for asking me about Osman Kavala, because there is really no topic I love to talk about than what I call Turkey's secular saint. Because for those of us in the audience who don't know who he is, Osman Kavala is Turkey's leading philanthropist who has devoted his wealth, time, and energy to promoting pluralism in Turkey. He has been the lead benefactor of projects to document and preserve Turkey's religious minority heritage. He has been a leading supporter of Turkish-Kurdish peace process and rapprochement. He has been a lead supporter of Turkish-Armenian reconciliation. And he has also done a lot of projects to promote women's equality, gender equality, and children's rights. In any other country but Erdogan's Turkey, such an individual would be awarded the highest merit in that country for his selfless, generous devotion of his wealth to the well-being of the entire nation, literally the entire nation, without leaving a single person out. Now, sadly, as it is the case with most of Erdogan's crazy politics, this is also grounded in anti-Semitism. Because what really ticked Erdogan off against Kavala was Kavala's, in Erdogan's mind, role behind the scenes during the Gezi Park protests. Because Erdogan accused Kavala in person of being, he said, that Hungarian Jews kind of terror financier in Turkey. You know, Erdogan was referring to Soros. So in Erdogan's mind, the Gezi Park protests of 2013, which were countrywide, which brought over 10 million citizens from all walks of life, were not legitimate expressions of grievances. He believes they were orchestrated by a global Jewish cabal. Now, he believes Osman Kavala was the point person of that conspiracy. So, although there isn't a single shred of evidence against Kavala, he has been in pre-trial detention in a maximum security prison in solitary confinement for over 4 years, despite an acquittal in a Turkish court and despite a binding decision of the European Court of Human Rights for his immediate release. Now, Erdogan's insistence on not releasing him has caused the Council of Europe to start infringement procedures. This is the second time in the history of the Council of Europe that Strasbourg decided to start infringement procedures against a member state for failing to abide by the binding rulings of the European Court of Human Rights in such a serious landmark case. And ultimately, this can lead to the suspension of Turkey's voting rights or even its membership from the Council of Europe. And Turkey has actually been part of the Council of Europe right from the very start. So Turkey has been an integral part of the post-war European order and the human rights regime in Europe. So I think this one case answers this question best to show how reckless Erdogan has been when it comes to human rights and freedoms, when it comes to the rule of law and due process, and when it comes to Turkey's international obligations stemming from its international conventions, such as the European Convention on Human Rights, to which Turkey is signatory to.
Beautiful, beautiful. And one more question before I turn it over to my wonderful colleague, Hussein. And that I'm very, very curious about the relationship between Turkey and Russia since the sale of the S-400 missile defense system and the balance that Turkey's managed to walk with NATO. What is its relationship with Russia and with NATO right now?
Now, thank you, Sarah, for asking a question that I've been studying very hard on. It's a complicated question, but I have the material at hand because together with two great colleagues, Sinan Ciddi of the Marine Corps College and John Hardy of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, we just co-authored a lengthy monograph, a report on Turkish-Russian relations. And the title says it all: collusion or collision. And that really puts in a nutshell the ups and downs of the Putin-Erdogan relationship. Because on the one hand, Putin and Erdogan has been really best of allies. Erdogan purchased the S-400 air defense system from Russia, making Turkey the first NATO member state purchasing a big ticket Russian military hardware and being sanctioned under CAATSA sanctions, unheard of. So Erdogan has that honor. Second, Erdogan hedged Turkey's dependence on Russian gas by awarding Russia a $20 to $30 billion tender to build Turkey's first nuclear reactor, making Turkey even more dependent on Russian energy. To make matters worse, he then built a new pipeline under the Black Sea, bypassing Ukraine, and added Turk Stream to the Blue Stream, giving Russia further access to the Turkish markets and making Turkey more dependent on Russian gas, and allowing Putin to bypass Ukraine in its energy exports, hence strengthen its leverage over Ukraine. Furthermore, in Syria, yes, Turkey and Russia and Turkey and Iran are on opposing sides of the civil war, but at the same time, keep in mind that through the Astana process, Turkey coordinates with Russia and Iran its Syria policy. And in fact, Turkey is on the same page with Russia and Iran when it comes to pushing the US forces out of northeast Syria. So in a way, what I summarize this as, Erdogan and Putin from time to time have disagreements among the long list of agreements they have. But every time they have a disagreement, they find a win-win solution that always comes at the expense of Turkey's Western allies. And I think, again, I know there are some analysts in Washington who present Turkey as an important counterweight to Russia. But as I have written over the years, including this last monograph, Erdogan has been the leading spoiler within NATO when it comes to NATO's attempts to issue either punitive statements or implement punitive action against Russia and its proxies such as Belarus. So in a way, Erdogan serves Putin more as a Trojan horse within NATO than as one of the other satellite states of Russia. So my take-home message would be, don't be fooled when Erdogan markets himself as the great counterweight to Russia, because ultimately Putin has never had a better partner in Turkey than Erdogan himself.
Amazing. As President Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify. So now it's my honor to hand the podium over to my wonderful colleague, Hussein Abubakar Mansour, who will be reading the questions that have come in. Hussein.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you very much, Aykan, for such a penetrating presentation, and thank you very much for all our audience who's been following us. We've received many notes of thanks to you, Aykan, and we have, by the way, we have a lot of Turkey experts and giants with us as well. Harold Rhodes, Evie Gold, many people are sending you thanks for such a wonderful presentation. We received a lot of questions. I can already tell we're not going to be able to go through all of them. So I'm going to try to combine as many as possible in one question. But before I go to the questions, maybe we should start by asking you, where can people find your writings? Where can they find online resources for more information or analytical perspective like this on Turkey?
So there are two easy portals to reach me. One is, if you go to fdd.org, and if you go to my page there, you'll see all my FDD work there. And if you want to see all my op-eds and reports and books and video casts and audio casts in one place, you can also go to my first name, last name, aykanerdemir.com, where there are links to all my works in one handy place.
Amazing. Thank you. I'm going to combine a few questions. We received a number of questions about the possibility, basically, of replacing Erdogan. How possible is this at the moment? Is this possible to happen through the next elections? Will the next elections be actually free? is this possible to happen through a military coup? What is the current situation of the Turkish military establishment? Is it now completely co-opted by Erdogan? So basically, we received a lot of questions about possibility of him leaving.
Thank you, Zain. Very important questions. First of all, the elections in Turkey have not been fair for quite some time, meaning the playing field, Erdogan has tilted the playing field long time ago that we shouldn't have any assumption about fair elections. But they have been relatively free until now. But what I mean by relatively free is that, especially when it comes to the pro-Kurdish People's Democratic Party, we have seen numerous candidates and party officials have been jailed either during the campaigns or after taking their posts. We have seen almost every single one of the pro-Kurdish mayors removed from office after getting elected by landslide votes and replaced by Erdogan's hand-picked trustees. And just to contextualize this, what it really means is, imagine, let's say that you have the Washington, D.C. mayor who gets, let's say, 60% of the vote. The day after her election, she is removed, let's say, by President Biden, and then he appoints someone from the Washington state as trustee, as the new mayor, someone who has never been in Washington, D.C. before, who doesn't know the people, who doesn't know any of the local administrative issues. So this is where Turkey is. But I don't want to sound pessimistic, because even under such conditions, Erdogan has lost elections. In 2019, Erdogan even annulled the Istanbul elections, hoping that in a rerun, he could strong-arm, the opposition candidate into losing. What happened was there was a massive reaction, even from Erdogan's own grassroots, and Erdogan lost the second election by 800,000 votes, by a significant margin. So this gives me hope that even under one of the most, let's say, unfair electoral settings, Erdogan can still lose elections. In fact, during the last month, we have seen in the polls that Erdogan's approval ratings are at an all-time low. And the opposition mayors of Istanbul and Ankara both now have 2-digit leads against Erdogan if they choose to run in the presidential elections. So, but the key question is this: will Erdogan now allow an election that he will definitely lose? What other dirty tricks does he have up his sleeve? But more importantly, let's assume he hopes to win but loses again, just like in 2019. Will he concede defeat? Will there be peaceful transition of power in Turkey? And can Turkey return to normalcy? And my quick answer to that is, we don't yet know. But we know that it all depends on what the United States and the European Union will do or fail to do. So I would like to argue that if from now we have a uniform, strong, kind of concerted message coming from Brussels and Washington, telling Erdogan that you have to have free elections, you have to concede defeat if you lose, and if not, we will come after you and your cronies with global Magnitsky sanctions, with other instruments to defend democracy and human rights. And keep in mind, for those of you in the audience who are not hopeful about sanctions, Erdogan has a soft underbelly. He has basically, his kleptocratic regime has basically stolen hundreds of billions of dollars from the Turkish people and hid these in offshore havens, which means he is very susceptible to pressure. So I would argue that if the Western world, if Turkey's NATO allies make it clear to Erdogan that there will not be any appeasement, there will be, strong repercussions, there will be serious, concrete repercussions for cheating and stealing Turkey's elections, then I think Erdogan could find himself in a position to basically leave office after losing it. Now, the question is, I know we have some colleagues who are arguing Erdogan would never agree to that. He will be prosecuted in Turkey, and he and his family members and his cronies would then end up in jail. But I think there's a way out, and that way out is Erdogan could take refuge in Doha, in Qatar, and his Qatari allies, his Muslim Brotherhood allies, could offer him a lavish palace there, since Erdogan has gotten used to living in a 1,150 room palace over the last couple of years. And he can continue to tap into his offshore accounts until the day Turkish authorities track them down and repatriate those assets. But I think there is still a way out for Erdogan that doesn't entail prison time.
And how about the military? Is a possible military coup, it's still a possibility at all, or is that era over from Turkish politics?
Now, with this question, I really need to be very careful, because only a few months before the 2016 failed coup attempt, I was quoted in the Washington Times as saying, the era of military coups in Turkey is over. And that was a humbling experience, because I was proven wrong only a few months later. So today, I have the same strong sentiment. I feel as if the era of military coups is over in Turkey. But history is very humbling. So I might once again be proven wrong. But let me also try to provide another answer to that. And that is, almost always, when the Turkish military tried to correct course in Turkish politics, I would argue it messed things up. It made things even worse. So I would like to go against the grain here and argue that the Turkish military actually has not been a kind of a staunch defender of secularism in Turkey. In fact, I think the Turkish military has been culpable in fact, unintentionally at times and intentionally at others, promoting political Islam. And so I again would like to argue that it is in the best interests of Turkey's secular liberal democracy for military to remain in its barracks and not mess up Turkish politics yet another time.
Thank you. Humility is not a very common virtue in Washington, D.C., so it's very refreshing to see that there are experts who are still very humble. Thank you. The last question that I want to ask you is actually about the Western perspective and the U.S. perspective. So from the Western perspective, is there truly any alternative to having good relations with Turkey, given specifically the era that we're entering with the return of superpower competition, Iran rising dangerously in the Middle East, Russia. So basically, there's so many very large fish on our plate. Is there any alternative, given these circumstances, to being so close to Turkey?
Now, again, I would argue, for example, this question sometimes is posed in another way, and that is, should we kick Turkey out of NATO? And let me try to answer them both, because I think they're connected. And my answer every single time is, first of all, there is no mechanism to kick any NATO member out of NATO, given it's a unanimous decision-making mechanism. and you need Erdogan's vote to kick himself out of NATO. Second, I would argue, even if there is an opportunity to kick Turkey out of NATO, even after 20 years of rule by Erdogan, I would argue against it. I would argue, why should we push Turkey further toward Russia, China, and Iran, and present it as easy prey, and instead of investing in Turkey's strong pro-Western public to bring Turkey back into the NATO fold. And I still believe it is a possibility. I still believe that the challenges in the Middle East are great. That is, Turkey is an absolute necessity to the alliance structure NATO has in the Middle East to counter not only Iranian and Russian expansionism, but also the creeping Chinese influence. We have witnessed the Chinese over the last decade snatching many of the strategic assets in, Greece, Turkey, Israel, and other countries in the East Med. And all of this, I think, I know this is easier said than done. All of this requires that we win the battle in Turkey, meaning we win the battle of Turkey's pro-Western Democrats versus Islamists in Turkey and ultranationalists in Turkey. And the reason why I love this framing of the question is because it will force us to do the right thing. Because if we believe Turkey is dispensable, if we believe we can win without Turkey, then we can, let's say, continue the appeasement policies we have been implementing. But if we believe we have to have Turkey on our side, just like we had it during the Cold War, then we will find a policy that goes beyond appeasement, that is dedicated to winning, that is dedicated to solidarity with Turkey's pro-Western majority, and that is dedicated to pushing back against Erdogan's hateful, belligerent, and irredentist agenda.
Thank you. On that wonderful note, believe it or not, we're coming to a close. I want to thank you, Aykan, for your years and years of brilliant, cogent analysis, for your intellectual honesty, and for your moral courage. You really are a tremendous asset for everyone here in the West who believes in Western values. And I fondly remember the days that I looked upon Turkey as that paradigm of a Muslim, secular, democratic state with free human rights. And let's hope that one day we will see that reemerge. I want to thank Aykan. I want to thank our wonderful friends at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. It's a wonderful think tank, and we love to collaborate with them. If you would like to support the good work of Aykan, did I say I want to thank Erdogan? I said I want to thank Aykan and the wonderful, I'm sorry. If you would like to support the work of Aykan and so many of our wonderful colleagues at FDG, please go to fdg.org. Also, as you know, Amet believes very, very strongly that a well-informed public can possibly trickle up to well-informed policymakers. So if you'd like to continue these things and to support our work, please go to ametonline.org. And thank you, Aykan. It was truly an honor and a privilege and a pleasure to have you as a friend. It always will be, and to have you back on our webinar once again.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Naomi. Thank you, Hussein. It was always a pleasure to be with Amet.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.